Next week, BBC Two begins an outstanding short series of profiles of some of the 20th century's most enduring icons. Living Famously kicks off with Oliver Reed on Monday afternoon at 3:30 here on BBC Two.
Who is the greatest Briton?
The person I'm talking about
Took the slag heap of humanity
to help give us parliamentary democracy. The genius
with the political scruples of
Gandhi with a sense of humour,
pulling us along from the front
led us to victory
and reshaped
our country and culture,
but paid the ultimate price.
Join us live in the studio as the campaigners battle it out to win your support. Great Britain's the greatest of them all. Sunday at 9 on BBC Two. Who gets your vote?
Live to Westminster, now on BBC Two, with Zainab Badawi.
Critical talks are underway to try to head off the 8-day fire strike tomorrow. But if there is a new deal, where's the money going to come from? Good afternoon, welcome to Westminster Live. The negotiations going on at a secret location in central London right now are probably the best chance of averting tomorrow's fire strike and possibly even of bringing an end to the dispute. The Fire Brigades Union is meeting local government employers to hear the terms of a new pay deal that's being described as a final offer. They're believed to be discussing an increase of 16% over 2 years. But with the government insisting it has no extra money to fund such an increase, how can the deal be paid for? Also, the government today publishes its criminal justice bill aimed at rebalancing the system in favour of the victim. But is it going too far in eroding civil liberties? And how much opposition will it meet in Parliament?
Thank you very much indeed for this Zurich Spectator Award. Thank you, Boris.
And the winner is the Prime Minister himself. Tony Blair is named Parliamentarian of the Year in a much coveted award. Now, just over 18 hours to go before tomorrow's 8-day fire strikes are due to begin. In the past hour, the leader of the Fire Brigades Union, Andy Gilchrist, has gone into talks with representatives of local government employers. It's understood there's an offer on the table of 16% to be paid in stages. The union has said that's a good starting point, but the Local Government Association has warned ministers that a deal can't be financed without its help. Our correspondent John Brain has been following developments in central London. John, well, tell us what you know. What is the latest?
Well, we understand that an offer of some sort has now formally been put to the union leaders at a secret location somewhere near here. And Andy Gilchrist, the leader of the FBU, has been invited to come back here where the employers are meeting to discuss it in more detail. Now, we believe that this is the 16% offer that has been widely trailed, but we haven't got confirmation of that. And it may not be quite as clear-cut as that, because the employers were meeting here for some 3 hours this morning, and the unions were waiting at their hotel just half a mile away for a phone call which never came. Andy Gilchrist said he was absolutely astonished that they hadn't contacted him earlier. So it may be that the employers weren't in full agreement amongst themselves. If it is a 16% offer, many of the employers' representatives that I've spoken to this morning said that their authorities would simply not be able to afford it without government help. Although they feel there is some slack in the system, they could make some efficiency savings from changing the working practices amongst the fire crews. They don't feel that would bridge the gap. They're saying the government's got to step in, and as we're aware, the government is saying there is no more money to be offered.
Right, I know nothing's been confirmed yet, and all we know is that 16% is on the table, and in stages. Can you tell us anything more about that? I mean, how long? Over 2 years, 3 years, a year, or what?
Well, the latest we've been told is that it would actually be in stages, but over 1 year. So by November 2003, qualified firefighters could expect to earn £25,000 a year, and if they're working in London, it would be £28,000 to take into account the extra costs of living in the capital. So the increase would, under the plan that was leaked earlier, come in fairly quickly. Of course, though, as I say, it is really a question of who's going to pay for it.
Do you feel at all that in the air you can kind of sniff around that a strike may be avoided after all?
I think all sides at the moment are cautiously optimistic that the strike tomorrow could be avoided and that further negotiations could take place. That's not to say anyone's talking in terms of there being a settlement to the dispute today, but there are hopes, certainly the will is there on both sides that tomorrow's strike doesn't go ahead. But of course there's a lot of talking to do this afternoon before they reach that stage.
All right, John, thank you very much for now. And of course, if there are any developments on those negotiations, we'll come back to you. Well, if a 16% offer does emerge and if it is accepted, then where will the money come from? Our political correspondent, Carol Walker, is in Downing Street. Carol, is the government sticking to its script, which is no more money?
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, Gordon Brown, the Chancellor, addressed a meeting of the Cabinet here this morning and made it absolutely clear that the public spending envelope is sealed. It's not going to be reopened again. That dipping into the reserves would wreck the economy and perhaps his long fought for reputation for prudence. So there's no more money from the government overall. Now, the local authority employers are saying that, well, yes, perhaps some money might come from savings, but of course that would take a long time to come through, and in the meantime they need some cash up front. And Sir Jeremy Beecham of the Local Government Association was making it clear he expects the government to come up with at least some sort of transitional funds.
We would certainly be looking to the government to help bridge that gap, and we would expect a reasonably sympathetic response. And there have been some indications from the Deputy Prime Minister publicly that might be the case. It would make sense because it's in effect investing to save, which is certainly a legitimate conventional approach from government, and we also think that our proposals are consistent with the Bain approach, which envisages, quite apart from the immediate 11.3%, it envisages also a new formula being applied, and it's the application of the new formula which from next November, which, if that's agreed this morning by the employer's side, would lead to the overall package.
Let's just try and unpack, Carol, what Sir Jeremy Beecham was saying there. He referred to the 11.3% offered by Sir George Bain, the review that the government has commissioned on the fire service. Now, let's look at the arithmetic. If what we're talking about now, it would seem, is 16%, and what Bain has offered is 11.3%, is that the shortfall which the local government employees are saying the government should meet?
Well, no, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, Zainab, because don't forget, what Bain was recommending was 4% in the first year and 7% in the second year. And of course, if you're looking at a timescale like that, and if you can get this key deal on modernisation, by the time you get into the second year, then perhaps the sort of savings from the big changes in the working practices that the government wants to see, perhaps those savings could start to kick in. But if you're starting to talk about getting it all done in the first year, then the figures start to become a little higher. But it's interesting now that I understand that the focus is now being put on John Prescott himself, and the employers turning to him and saying, well, OK, if Gordon Brown won't loosen the overall government purse strings, what about in your department? Is there any sense in which John Prescott, from within his departmental spending limit, could find enough money to at least get talks going and get the strike suspended?
All right, Carol Walker, for now, thank you very much. Well, with me now is the Chairman of the Trade and Industry Select Committee, Martin O'Neill. Martin O'Neill, well, look, if the local government employers and the Fire Brigades Union do strike some kind of deal and the government is expected to cough up some extra money, if it doesn't, how can it avoid looking like the villain of the piece?
Well, I think that the government would turn around and say, well, if we give money to firemen, why shouldn't we give it to any other part of the public service that starts to flex its muscles? And equally, there is an agenda for savings. And one can understand the approach of the local government association. They want to avoid a strike. But at the end of the day, no one has ever been under any illusions that the savings will have to be substantial to warrant an award of the kind that's now being envisaged. And in the past, and let's make this point, they haven't been very good at getting the kind of change conditions that would be necessary to secure these savings. And it's putting a lot into a very short window of negotiation.
But if it's acknowledged that some kind of modernisation of the fire services, some changes, some reforms would actually bring about some savings in the long term, why can't the government put up some money now, as Sir Jeremy Beecham was sort of suggesting, to bridge this transitional gap where in the short term you actually might need more money before the modernisation kicks in?
Well, the impression I have is that neither John Prescott nor Gordon Brown are convinced that the level of improvements that are being suggested are going to be sufficient to bring in the degree of savings that would be required. And as a consequence of that, they are holding out for more savings to be forthcoming. And the fact is that other groups of local government workers who have enjoyed the kind of rises over time, and usually over a longer period than the firemen are wanting, have made substantial concessions. And what is good enough for them in the eyes of the Cabinet seemed to be good enough for the firemen.
But the government, in a sense, has already acknowledged that the fire service is, in a sense, a kind of exceptional case, and it's commissioned the Bain review, and it said, well, look, Bain has come up with just over 11%, which is much more than what other public sector workers are getting. So in a sense, the government has already acknowledged that there is an exception to the fire service.
I don't think they have. I think they've recognised that as a group of workers, the pay formula they had before wasn't the right one. But equally, neither the union nor the local authority employers have seriously engaged in discussions over the last 20 years to try and improve either the work practices or the pay formula. And they're coming with everything at the one time. And the government is saying, we're not prepared to fund your reluctance and recalcitrance in terms of coming to a proper working practice a lot earlier.
But ultimately, responsibility lies with the government, and after all, John Prescott is the Cabinet Minister responsible for the fire service. Why did the government itself not see this potential flashpoint and say, aha, we've got to intervene and do something?
Well, I think that the fact was that until the strike started, there was no great pressure on government.
We know as far back in the summer that the local government employees and the FBU were meeting, and apparently the FBU say 16% was kind of talked about in the air, never quite put on the table, and the government came in and said, aha, no, that's too much.
Oh, well, but I mean, the government all along has said that they are not going to return to the kind of situation that we had in the 1970s, where local authority workers, as a school teacher, I got 23% through the Houghton scheme. Within 18 months, it was worthless because of inflation and high interest rates. They don't want to give signals to the rest of the public service that somehow, if they threaten to go on strike, they will get an award over and above.
So what happens now then?
theirs.
The government turns around, central government turns around and says to the local government employees, fine, you sort out this mess, get the money from what? Higher council tax bills? We're all going to have to pay ultimately, the taxpayer?
Well, I think that isn't even a luxury that they have, because the tax bills are set in March for the forthcoming year, and at the moment it's unlikely that a supplementary tax would be charged simply to fund the fire workers' dispute. And I have to say to you that the view amongst the government, from what I've discerned, is quite adamant. They are not going to pay for a dispute which they consider to be the responsibility of the fire service, both employers and workers, to resolve. And they are not prepared to allow the macroeconomic stability that we've achieved in this country to be jeopardised to satisfy the demands of a small group of workers.
Sounds like they've got no strategy then. I mean, George Bain's review seems to be up in tatters. I mean, the FBU have said it's derisory, so he doesn't know what to do, really.
Well, I mean, I don't think the FBU have much of a case in criticising Bain, since they never even offered any evidence to the inquiry. And if there are shortcomings in it of a practical character, they lay at the door of the FBU, not at the door of Bain.
Martin O'Neill, thank you. Now, this afternoon, the government published its long-awaited criminal justice bill, setting out an overhaul of the system in England and Wales. Some of the changes have already been proving controversial. We'll be discussing that in a moment. But first, this is how the Home Office Minister, Lord Falconer, came to the Lords today to make the case for change.
The criminal justice system focuses too much on the defendant and too little on the victim. It needs to be rebalanced in favour of the victim. The court process from charging to sentence requires fundamental reform to make it more focused and effective in dealing with crime. In reforming the criminal justice system, it is vital that certain principles are regarded as sacrosanct. These principles The three fundamental principles on which our criminal justice system are based are, first, the independence of the judiciary, second, the presumption of innocence, and the principle that a defendant can only be found guilty of a criminal offence when the state has proved his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and third, jury trial as the norm for serious cases. Our reforms maintain these central principles.
My Lords, if the Home Secretary is tempted to be carried away by a desire to appeal to populism and dismisses too lightly the unintended negative consequences of that, it is the victims of crime who will suffer. As my right honourable friend Ian Duncan Smith said in another place last week, one does not fight crime by undermining the civil liberties of law-abiding citizens while allowing thugs and criminals to walk free.
Baroness Anna Ley for the Conservatives. Well, let's look again at some of those main proposals in the Criminal Justice Bill. First, the new bill would abolish trial by jury in serious and complex fraud cases. In very serious cases where compelling new evidence came to light, it would abolish the rules on double jeopardy, whereby a defendant can't be tried twice for the same charge. The bill would also change the rules on evidence to allow the use in court of a defendant's previous convictions where relevant, and it would increase magistrates' powers. Well, joining me now to discuss all this, I have two Labour MPs who also happen to be barristers, Ross Cranston and Vera Baird. Ross Cranston, how can the government try to justify the abolition of trial by jury? It's been around for, what, 800 years? I know it's only in some cases, but still, it's upsetting an awful lot of people.
Well, Zainab, of course, it's in a very small number of cases, but I mean, basically, with these large, complex frauds, it's very difficult to get a representative jury, because you just can't expect ordinary people to be there for 3 months or 6 months. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that the prosecution has to strip down the case and present only one aspect of it, so that the full criminality involved doesn't become public. And I think that for those two reasons, change is necessary.
Vera Baird, I mean, that sounds fair enough. It's only in serious, complex fraud cases which might go on for months and months, and nobody's going to want to give up their time to do that.
No, first of all, the issue has been the complexity of the case, and I've always thought it immensely patronising to say, vote Labour, but you're not clever enough to do fraud cases. In fact, the prosecution have a duty to winnow down the case until it can be manageable, and they can do that. There's no suggestion anywhere that by doing that any element of criminality is lost. The Serious Fraud Office, who prosecute this kind of fraud precisely, have an 86.6 conviction rate in front of juries. So little do they comprehend serious fraud that the Serious Fraud Office must be glad of that, and there are very few appeals. Consequently, the defendants seem to be glad with that. What's the need for change?
Right, that's one argument. Ross Cranston
it's not patronising. I didn't make that argument, and the government hasn't made that argument. It's simply saying you can't get a representative jury. And also, I mean, I've been interested in this field for something like 25 years, and I've always been concerned about the injustice that white-collar crime is treated differently from ordinary crime. Now, because the prosecution has to strip down the case, the jury doesn't get the full complexity. It's not saying the jury can't understand it, but you strip it down so that they only see one aspect and they don't get a full appreciation of the complexity. A judge sitting alone would get that.
All right, well, you know, there's also another argument which some Labour MPs are also putting against this abolition of trial by jury, and they say, thankfully, at the moment, the threatening and bribery of judges is something which really doesn't happen, but abolish juries and you might start seeing this kind of thing happen a bit more often in Britain.
Well, you're not abolishing juries, because this is only a very small number of cases. I mean, we're very, very lucky. We're very lucky with our criminal bar. We're very lucky with our judiciary. We are very fortunate, and in the main the jury system is going to remain there. It's only in a very small number of cases for those two reasons that we would want to change the system.
Vera Baird, what else don't you like about the Criminal Justice Bill? What about scrapping the rule on double jeopardy?
I don't have very serious problems with double jeopardy. I've always thought, because there's a telling case in my own constituency of a girl who was murdered. Her assailant was tried, he was acquitted, later he confessed. So comprehensively did he confess that he's in prison for perverting the course of justice by lying about it in his first trial, but he's untouchable.
So you don't mind that one, but neither of you is perturbed by
much.
the criticism that people like the Liberal Democrats are saying, which is if you scrap double jeopardy and somebody's retried again for a case for which they were acquitted in the past, how can you avoid the presumption of guilt that will hang over that person?
Well, first of all, it won't be retrial sort of at will. It will have to to go to a Court of Appeal judge who will decide it on the merits, and I can't imagine there being more than a handful of cases.
But in those handful of cases, there would be a presumption of guilt, wouldn't there, hanging over that person?
There's a model for this. There is already on the statute book and a permission for the Court of Appeal to order a retrial in a case where some interference with the jury has brought about a false acquittal. Nobody really complains that if that mechanism is used, there's an implication of guilt. I think it's going to be very important what the judge tells the jury about the fact that it's a retrial if they know it. But I think it's a manageable problem.
Ross Cranston, I mean, are you not worried that, we just heard there a Conservative here actually saying, well, this is an erosion of civil liberties and so on. I mean, the Labour Party has always prided itself in the past on its great protection of civil liberties, and now some people are saying you're sounding a bit authoritarian.
Well, I don't accept that criticism. I mean, this small change, again, is going to, as Vera quite rightly said, affect only a very few cases. I mean, take the case. I mean, there was Vera's case in the constituency, but take the case where DNA evidence later demonstrates that someone acquitted is guilty.
The broad thrust, not just the double jeopardy, but the broad thrust
of this.
No, but
this is what I'm saying, that these are only very incremental, small changes in the system, and as we have said constantly, we're not only concerned about making sure that the people who aren't guilty are acquitted, but also that the guilty are convicted.
Can I say that the bill, we've only had a very quick look at it because it came out less than an hour ago, but it appears to be a lot less draconian than it was rumoured to be likely.
Oh, so you're not too worried? You don't think there's going to be a sizable Labour rebellion then against it?
I'm still worried. I can't predict what my colleagues will want to do, but certainly the admission of hearsay is not such a wholesale provision as we thought it was going to be. The admission of previous convictions, I think, is still a problem as to one clause, but is better than we thought it was going to be. The devil remains in the detail on those two, but they really are not as bad as they were mooted to be. My real worry remains eroding the right to trial by jury. And fine, at the moment, the defendant will elect if he wants to have a trial by judge alone. We had an issue in the Magistrates' Court very recently where defendants can elect to have jury trial if they want, and the plan was to take that election away and give it to someone else. How long is it going to be before the election's taken out of the defendant's hand and put in the judge's hands, and then jury trials become not the norm at all?
Right, okay, so it's the jury thing that's going to really upset most people, but otherwise government can rely on
the government has listened and made changes.
Well,
yeah.
Ross Cranston, Vera Baird, thank you both.
Thank you.
Now, the humble cod has been making the news a lot of late. That's because cod stocks are dwindling so badly that huge cuts in fish hauls are needed if we're to stop it dying out. That's the conclusion of the European Commission, who are considering reductions in fishing fleets of up to 80%. But industry leaders are trying to avoid a complete ban on cod fishing in the North Sea, Irish Sea and off the west coast of Scotland, because such a move, they say, would result in the loss of thousands of jobs. Well, earlier in the Commons, a number of MPs whose constituencies are reliant on fishing expressed concerns about the effects of any ban.
The fishing communities in Scotland, Northern Ireland and the north of England are demoralised by the apparent Prime Minister's indifference to a crisis which threatens thousands of jobs. What plan does the Fisheries Minister have to engage government at the highest level to resist the total lunacy that's being proposed by the European Commission?
Can I first of all say that government is engaged at the highest level in relation to representing the needs of our fishing communities, and we well understand the implications on a regional basis in terms of the importance of the fishing industry and the potential consequences of these kind of changes. But what we cannot do is deny the science. We can't do that. We must look that into account, and we must, of course, challenge it. And I make it very clear to the House that we will not sign up to any issue from the UK government until we are clear about what is being proposed and the justification for it. And where I do agree with the right honourable gentleman is, for example, it was originally talked about restricting the nephrops fishery because of the cod bycatch, and he will be aware that we've done a great deal of scientific work looking at the level of cod bycatch in that North Sea fishery, which is minimal. And he will also notice that these calls to restrict that have now been withdrawn by the Commission.
Elliot Morley. Well, join me now from Central Lobby is the Labour MP for Great Grimsby, Austin Mitchell, and from our Cardiff studio, Bernadette Clark from the Marine Conservation Society. Austin Mitchell, we need to protect dwindling fish stocks, don't we?
We shouldn't, but I think the Commission is hyping up the crisis of the situation in order to impose more draconian measures in the common fisheries policy. And it's right to say that let's see what the existing measures, which are an increase in mesh sizes to 120 millimetres, which are a reduction in the fleet, substantial reductions in Denmark, and area conservation measures. Let's wait and see what effect they have before we stop North Sea cod fishing. That would be disastrous for the industry, and there's no reason for it, and our minister will in fact oppose it.
What would it do to the fishing industry in your constituency?
Well, effectively it would close it down, and it would be closed down without benefit of support or subsidy. You just can't do that. It's right to take tough measures, but it's fair to say that it's the common fisheries policy so far, by sharing out fish as if it was all political decision, not a conservation decision, has caused this crisis. And we don't get round the crisis by making the common fisheries policy which caused it tougher. Let's take measures appropriate to the area, and that's what the fishing industry is in favour of. It wants a role in management of the stocks in the North Sea.
All right, Bernadette Clark in Cardiff. We've just heard what Austin Mitchell had to say there. I mean, really, a ban would be very tough on the livelihood of many people who depend on the fishing industry.
Yes, certainly the implications of a complete closure for whitefish fisheries in the North Sea and other areas would mean the loss of many jobs. And certainly I agree with Mr. Mitchell in saying that the crisis that we're currently facing is a result of the political situation caused by the common fisheries policy. However, the situation is, if we can accept the scientific advice, is that cod stocks in the North Sea, in the west of Scotland and other areas are at the lowest levels that we've experienced for many years. And I believe that this advice cannot be ignored. We cannot ignore the fact that the stocks have declined to such serious levels, and obviously if there's no fish in the sea, we cannot expect to continue fishing at the levels that we're living.
Right, Bernadette Clark though, but if everybody accepts that cod stocks are depleted, but why have a ban on other kinds of fishing of whitefish? Why not just say, okay, don't fish the cod?
Because it's not as simple as that. Cod is part of a complex mixed fishery which comprises haddock, whiting and nephrops, or prawns as they're referred to. So it's not that simple, especially when we're using output controls like total allowable catches and quotas to conserve or manage stocks.
Austin Mitchell, what about a reduction? Because, I mean, obviously there is a real need to protect cod stocks. What about a reduction in fishing?
Well, the point is right. There's bound to be bycatches, you see, if you have any other fishing continuing, because this is a mixed fisheries in the North Sea, and it's crazy in that situation, for instance, that Danish industrial fishing should go on with a substantial bycatch of small fish which will eventually grow to maturity. I think there's got to be a reduction effort. I think that's accepted. But it's too early to talk of a total ban. The scientific advice, though clear, is still tentative in its implications, and it's still time. There's still time to try the measures that the industry suggests, because they say fishermen are finding different spawning rates and different growth rates to those decreed or decided by the fishermen. So I think there's still time to try measures, but draconian measures like a total ban will be necessary if the next lot of measures don't work.
All right, Austin Mitchell and Bernadette Clark in Cardiff, thank you both. Now, it may not compare with the National Lottery, but the annual ballot for private members' bills has given 20 MPs the chance to introduce new laws. The Commons Deputy Speaker, Sir Alan Hazelhurst, presided over the draw at the House of Commons this morning. Those MPs at the top of the list have the best hope of getting their legislation through Parliament, and they'll now find themselves on the receiving end of some ferocious lobbying from pressure groups. Well, I'm joined by a spokesman from one of these pressure groups, Clive Bates from Action on Smoking and Health, known as ASH, and by two MPs who were successful in the ballot, Labour's Anne Clwyd and the Tories' Edward Garnier. Anne Clwyd, well, is your phone red hot today?
Well, I was in a meeting when I heard that I'd come number 7 in the ballot. In the past, I've come number 7 and number 12. On both occasions, my bills were talked out. But as soon as I stepped out of this committee meeting this morning, there was a lobbyist outside pushing his particular bill on me. And of course, the phone has been going, and also people have been faxing me.
Well, let's see if Edward Garnier has also been the centre of attention, have you?
Yeah, we're all famous for 15 minutes, and I think I'm doing it right now. Yes, my telephone has been ringing off the desk, and I've had all sorts of helpful suggestions, both from the government whip, who deals with handout bills from the government, from lobbyists and interested groups of all sorts. So I'm enjoying it for the moment.
All right, well, Clive Bates, Anne Clewett has in the past said that she would be interested perhaps in a bill on protecting passive smokers in the workplace. You've got a ready-made one, haven't you?
We've got an outline of a bill. I mean, we're not so cheeky that we would actually produce the finished item, but the basic principles of protecting workers from, you know, the cancer-causing chemicals in cigarette smoke and how to deal with that in the workplace, what rights and obligations you place on employers. We've sort of spec'd that out in a pro forma outline of the bill, and we're pressing it around those that we think are promising candidates for taking it up, you know, based on things people have said previously, early day motions signed, members of all party groups and that kind of thing.
How long have you been trying to press this bill on suitable backbenchers?
We've been pressing the idea for many years. In terms of the intense campaigning, we've really started over the last couple of weeks, jointly with the British Medical Association, Cancer Research UK. We're all kind of moving in the last couple of weeks to try and get this up the agenda and up the tempo.
And is it a very long, drawn-out process generally then for pressure groups such as yourself? Because I know obviously you play a vital role in our political process.
Very kind of you to say. No, well, it's part of our ongoing work, really. I mean, we never let off the pressure on this. We're always doing something. But the private members' ballot that comes around, you know, once every 18 months or so, it's, you know, that's a really good moment to press this further. And in a way, we don't actually expect this to become law. We think the government will block it, but it puts a lot of pressure on the government to do something, and our aim is to get the government to do its own measures with this.
I've mentioned this particular interest of yours, Anne Clewett, but what other ideas have you got?
Well, I'm not deciding today. Obviously, I'm going to think about it over the weekend, and I, in fact, may not decide until later in the week. But I'll be looking at all the proposals. I'm quite interested in a number of them. One involves prohibiting taking young girls out of this country for female genital mutilation. That is a big problem, as you know. It's already unlawful in this country, although 74,000 African women mainly have already had this done to them. But at the moment they can take people out of the country, young girls, usually up to the age of 14, and get it done in another country where it's not unlawful. So I think it's quite important to try and stop that, because it is an awful practice, very painful for women, and it's not necessary.
Right, thank you. Well, I mean, Anne Clewett has there just told us a very harrowing account there, and obviously her interest in development issues sends her in that direction. But what about you, Edward Garnier? What kind of
Well, I got till
issues are you
December the
interested
10th, and I shall listen with great interest to all the suggestions that are being made to me. I haven't, sadly, yet had a bill from Mr. Bates here on my left, but no doubt...
Well, I've introduced you now, haven't I?
I think he probably thinks I'm rather unsuitable, but there we are.
But what are the main areas of interest that
Well, I think the one thing, you're not going to achieve anything if it's controversial, because the government will talk it out, and you're not going to achieve anything if it's expensive, if it's going to cost the government money, particularly this government. So you have to either go for a quick display of glory and go down in flames, but then you achieve notoriety for the point that you want to make, or you tuck in behind the government and produce some flaccid bill which will keep the government whips happy. Well, I'm not in the business of keeping the government whips happy. Equally, I'm not in the business of going down in flames. I want to actually do something which will achieve something for my constituents or for the general welfare. It sounds very fey and very self-obsessed, but I do think it's the one opportunity that a backbencher gets to actually do
desperate
something.
for it, aren't they? They'd give their IT for this opportunity. Anne Clewett, final word too. I mean, apparently private members' bills in future are going to have a better chance of succeeding because the government has said it would give them more time. Does that make you much more optimistic about getting your issues through?
There are no changes in the procedures as yet, although the Modernisation Committee is looking at this particular matter at the moment. But there are no changes which will enable some bills to see the light of day any more than there was in the past. But however, it is important to be able to air a point of view on a particular subject, even if you're not successful. I've done it several times in the past, and some of those bills have had a lot of publicity. I don't agree with Edward Garnier that you go down in flames as a result. It is important to air certain subjects, even if you can't get government backing at any particular time. And I would have thought he had enough difficulty keeping his own whips happy rather than trying to keep our government whips happy at the same time.
Anne Clewett in Central Lobby and Clive Bates here. Thank you very much. Edward Garnier, you're staying with me for our next instalment because As we came on air, we heard the result of one of Westminster's most eagerly awaited awards, the Parliamentarian of the Year award made by the weekly political magazine, The Spectator. The awards have been going on for 18 years, and this time, guess which blushing winner couldn't make it to the ceremony?
Thank you very much indeed for this Zurich Spectator Award. Thank you to Boris and all his team. Thank you to Boris for not just the work you do at The Spectator, but the excellent work you do for the Conservative Party. Thank you for the award, which this is the first award I've had actually since 1988 from The Spectator. Then we used to get a case load of whiskey. I suppose we get life assurance from Zurich now, but thank you very much indeed for this, and have a great time. I seem to remember the Spectator lunch as a pretty spectacular bash in the days that I used to go to it. So if there are any ministers there, kindly behave yourselves, and all the best to you. Many thanks for the award. Thank you.
Well, two of the other award winners have torn themselves away from the celebrations to be with us. Graham Allen, the Labour MP, has won Backbencher of the Year, and Adam Price from Plaid Cymru, who's won the Inquisitor of the Year award. And as I said, still with me here is the Conservative MP, Edward Garnier, who was also at the awards lunch. Very good lunch, I hear it was too. Graham Allen, well, Tony Blair there being made Parliamentarian of the Year. Now, you've written a slightly critical book, if I could say that, about the Prime Minister, talking about his presidential style. That doesn't make him very suitably qualified to being Parliamentarian of the Year, does it?
My book was about Prime Ministers, not about Tony Blair in particular, but the trend. It's an odd award. I think the Prime Minister could certainly have been in the running for Statesman of the Year, with what he's done on Iraq and building the coalition around Afghanistan. Most certainly would be in for that. And although Tony is a very accomplished parliamentarian and extremely good on his feet, there is a slight doubt about how committed he is to Parliament as opposed to the executive, in which I've alluded to in my work.
And you're wanting to add an amendment, aren't you, to the Commons motion, which is going to be debated next week.
It's a good example.
On Iraq, saying,
Yep.
Mr Blair, give us a proper role in
Classically,
Parliament.
the Prime Minister could be a partner with Parliament by having Parliament involved in the question of going to war, by allowing Parliament, as Congress does, to have some war-making powers, some final consultation before we go to war. But there seems to be this suspicion that the directly elected representatives of the people aren't quite up to it.
You're not
So
going
we
to introduce a motion
we should
saying,
leave
Mr
it
Blair, give back your award, are you?
Certainly not, no. I think he
right.
deserves his award, but maybe he'll get an award from a lot of backbenchers on Monday if he allows Parliament to have a say in the Iraqi conflict.
Right, well, you two chaps have come with your lovely awards. I don't know if our viewers there can see them, but they are very smart plates. Adam Price, you're Inquisitor of the Year, because you asked a crucial question that set off a whole chain of events. Just remind us what it was you did.
Well, it was because it was the Mittal affair, and questioning why the Prime Minister...
Over the Lakshmi Mittal.
Yes, indeed, why the Prime Minister wrote a letter to his Romanian counterpart on behalf of a company that ostensibly had very, very little links with the UK at all. What's interesting, in the light of today's award, of course, some of the same columnists that actually were judging the awarding the Prime Minister this were saying that the writing was on the wall. This was the beginning of the end for the Prime Minister. They thought they'd never see the day, but they...
All prompted by your one question.
Well, I think what it was that Mittal affair, of course, opened a whole host of similar scandals, and it actually, I think, dented the Prime Minister's credibility and his integrity. But what we've seen, of course, with the Blair presidency, as we saw with the Clinton presidency, that people may not trust the Prime Minister, but provided the economy is maybe doing relatively good, etc., his approval ratings are remaining high, even though possibly the reputation of politics and politicians has been severely damaged.
Edward Garnier, oh, bad day for the Tories, this, wasn't it? I mean, here you have a Tory-supporting magazine, which is edited by a Tory MP, Backbencher of the Year, Labour MP, Adam Price from Plaid Cymru, and Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, is Parliamentarian of the Year.
Bad day for Royal Mail. Why didn't the Prime Minister get Letter Writer of the Year for his Mittal letter? I think that what we're seeing is that the Spectator and the judges have got a fantastic sense of humour in giving Tony Blair this award. He is probably the one Prime Minister who has done more to destroy Parliament, has done more to destroy our representative democratic constitution.
But it's an award that's been given by the Spectator magazine that says it supports the Tory party.
Well, the Spectator magazine may or may not, but the judges are not all members of the Tory party. I have absolutely no doubt about that. They are independent journalists who have thought very carefully where their interests best lie in giving this award. They've chosen two worthy award receivers with us here today. But actually, it is actually slightly absurd that Blair has won this award. He's not of Parliament. He's a very accomplished and self-confident speaker at the dispatch box, and he's learnt to surf. He's now the Bondi Beach surfer. He can stand up on his board, which he could never...
I should just say very quickly, Gerald Kaufman, the veteran Labour MP, got Survivor of the Year. Do you think that might have been better awarded to Ian Duncan Smith?
No, Ian Duncan Smith has only been a Member of Parliament for 10 years, and he's got a long career ahead of him.
OK, gentlemen, got to leave it there. Thank you very much, because that's all we have time for today. I'll be back at midnight tonight with Dispatch Box. Also, next Wednesday, there'll be a special programme on the Chancellor's pre-budget report. You can share your views on how the economy is shaping up by logging on to the website at www.bbc.co.uk/Chancel or to OR2002. But for now, from all of us, goodbye. I hope you managed to make sense of that.
Brunel, the engineer, is currently the greatest Briton of all time. But will it all change by this Sunday night? Only your votes decide. You can vote online or by phone on 090 1122 1066. Calls cost 25 pence. And you can vote even if you voted before. Anne Robinson and I will be joining the presenters who championed the top 10 live in the studio as they battle it out to find the greatest Briton this Sunday at 9 o'clock on BBC Two. Who will be named greatest of them all? You decide.
Can a man be guilty of fighting back?
The case must be abandoned.
No, not inclined to do so.
Or of being too forward?
What do you do when you get off work?
I go home to bed.
That is a novel idea.
Judge John Deed, a law unto himself. The new series starts tonight at 8:30 on BBC One.
This is BBC Two with an afternoon summary of the news now from Fiona Bruce.